on anything, it'll
Yeah. Okay. So I just have a couple questions just about like your typical work day and like what your favorite parts of your job are. So how did you come to realize that this was the career path you actually wanted to take?
I actually knew when I was 3 years old that I wanted to work with animals or wildlife. I specifically wanted to become a veterinarian, which I probably would have, except I took a little curvy career path that was like 15 years of it was at the Columbus Zoo. And I thought I was going to work at the zoo a couple of years and then apply to vet school, but I really liked the job of wildlife education and rescuing wildlife, so I just stayed with that.
Yeah, that's actually what I actually figured when I was really little. So, because I know my mom actually took me to a cow farm, and I was just in love. I was like trying to pet the cows, and so that's kind of when I actually.
It's foreign to me to run, because most kids, when you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up, they're like, I don't know, or they're already in college, what's your major? I don't know yet. Because I always knew exactly what I was going to be doing, more or less, something related.
Because I have even told my friends have even told me, I can't see you doing anything else but work with animals. So
I started rescuing wildlife when I was 3.5. We lived in California, and tarantulas would get out on the road to sun themselves, and people would veer their cars to try to run them over, and so I would make my parents stop so we could pick them up off the road and set them in the brush. So
I'm the spider picker upper in my house. So
there you go.
I just catch them in cups, take them outside.
Yep.
So, what are the primary responsibilities of someone in a position like this?
For the city, I spent most of my life managing animals and education programs and training animals. So this is the first job I've had where I don't really have live animals I have to manage day to day. So the primary job in the city of Dublin is really to manage the wildlife knowledge, I guess you would say. There's a lot of misinformation or misconceptions about wildlife, or things come up where people see an animal and they want to know more about it. So I track through some biosurvey techniques and information that's tracked through the various departments, what types of animals live in the city and what types of plants and how many of them, kind of like a wildlife services department in the city. And then I provide a lot of education programs for all ages, lead hikes. One of our goals is to get people outside to connect with nature, because we all know we're a lot healthier mentally and physically if we get outside. And now with technology, that's even more critical, because young kids aren't growing up climbing trees nowadays. They're playing with their video games or their iPhones. So anything that we can do to get people excited about their surroundings. And one of our primary goals is to get the residents engaged in their environment. So all the different neighborhoods, some of them have neighborhood parks, some of them just have neighborhood green space, or their own yards. So getting them to plant pollinator plants to help butterflies and bees. And so the city sets that example in how we manage the green space that we have. And one of my projects coming up is a big pollinator meadow that we planted last fall at Darry Fields Park. We have 3 beehives the city of Dublin takes care of, and so we wanted to plant a wildflower meadow for those animals, and we're certified community wildlife habitat through the National Wildlife Federation. So another one of my responsibilities is to try to get more residents to get their own backyard habitat certification, and then I have to maintain the permits and certification classes, I guess you could say, or projects that we have to do to recertify each year, and just the permits for our skins and furs and biofacts and things like that.
What do you enjoy most about your work?
I like helping people understand their environment and the wildlife and how it's all interdependent. So right now, a lot of people have a lot of concerns about coyotes, and some people just want to get rid of all of them. But we need them, actually. And one of the things that most people wouldn't realize is there's a balance between mice, coyote, white-tailed deer, and the ticks that carry Lyme disease. And if we all of a sudden the coyote disappeared, like let's say the coyote just moved out of Dublin for some reason because there was better food outside the city, our mouse population and rodent population would get really pretty high because fox and coyote eat a lot of mice in the city. So they're the animals that carry Lyme disease. And then the larvae, when they get a certain age, they feed on the white-tailed deer. So if you take away the coyote and you reduce the deer, because a lot of people would like to reduce the deer herd, now those ticks are going to feed on humans and dogs and cats. So all of a sudden you'll see a spike in Lyme disease in people and pets if we have an imbalance in the coyote, fox, and white-tailed deer populations. So those are kind of the side effects of how the animals help us. And there's a lot of other beneficial things about having a balanced ecosystem and a balanced habitat. I also like helping the animals that actually are sick or injured. So residents will call because they found an animal that got hit by a car or something like that. I still volunteer with wildlife rehabilitation, so we take those animals into the hospital and make them well again. And I also really enjoy, my job is a lot of consulting, both for residents and even for the city, the mayor's office or city council. They're going to have the same questions because they have to answer to the public. So if the public is knocking on their door saying, what are we going to do about these killer coyote, then they're going to come to me and ask for the right biology and ecology of the animal and what should we do. They'll ask some questions about what do you think we should do, and then I can do the research and even bring in other consultants if needed or expertise. You know, I might use biologists from the Division of Wildlife I talk to a lot because they're actually out in the field studying those animals and things like that.
And I know you said something about the education like programs.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta find that. So the main goal of those programs is just to like get people more aware of their surroundings and
Right.
ecosystems.
Sometimes we offer a themed program. Right now I'm getting ready to do some programs on the history of Dublin, and we'll be talking about the types of wildlife that lived here 200 years ago, and then how the environment changed and the people changed and how that changed the landscape of the wildlife as well. And then sometimes it's just basic biology. These are the animals that live in your backyard. This is what they eat. This is how they live. And sometimes it's programs that are just to try to get people active in the parks. So we're offering hikes in the parks that will have fun activities going on that probably aren't specified in the brochure, but it gets people outside engaged in the parks and in nature. And we also have a lot of volunteer projects. So a lot of our park activity is actually through schools, private groups, and businesses here in Dublin who need to do community service hours, or they're working on a scout badge, or they're just volunteers that sign up to volunteer for the city of Dublin. So we get a lot of people outside with those programs as well.
Is there anything you don't like about your job in particular?
I don't think I would say I don't like it. It's hard when you have a resident who is really upset and you can't really console them with the biology. So like residents know that if you remove coyote, they start breeding in higher numbers. Or, you know, they still want you to tell them something different. They'll tell you, you know, I know the biology, I've read it, I went to all those websites you told me to go to, and I studied it, but what are you going to do about these coyote? And so it's kind of a vicious cycle because I haven't been able to give them the answer they want. Fortunately, most people are reasonable, and you know, eventually I can make some headway with them. We had a situation in one condo association where people were leaving out food for domestic cats, and so they ended up having a lot of skunks. And they wanted the city to say that the skunks were living and breeding in the city property and that we should do something about it. But in fact, they really were just kind of wandering through there and coming there every night because there was a food source. So eventually we got them on board with kind of a neighborhood watch program to make sure no one was leaving food out. And so, you know, they have less skunks if they don't have the food source. Occasionally a pet animal does get killed by an owl or a coyote, and then that's even a harder situation. So we had something like that happen recently. We don't know the cause of death of the dog specifically because the people didn't have a necropsy done, and the attending officers didn't really know exactly, you know, what to look for, but probably it was either a great horned owl or coyote. Either way, whenever a wild animal attacks and kills a pet, it's a very traumatic experience for the pet, obviously, and the owner. So, you know, we try to be very sensitive to that, but kind of keep it low key because you don't want people to panic and things like that. So, but that stirs up all the people from the last 10 years who have had a bad experience, or they know someone who did. You know, then they start contacting us, and that can be a little challenging to try to get everybody to take a deep breath and calm back down.
What is the typical education background for people within this field?
Most of the folks doing wildlife rescue, education, veterinary medicine are going to have either animal science, possibly a wildlife management, biology or zoology degree. I would recommend animal science for someone who actually wants to go into clinical practice. So if you plan on becoming rescue dog and cats at the shelter or veterinary medicine or whatever, the animal science programs are hands-on with live animals. It's, you know, a lot of domestic animals, but that experience is really important. And then volunteer, you know, at the zoo or at a wildlife center or a kennel, or the humane societies always need volunteers because all of that is resume building. That's very important. There's also teaching opportunities at all those institutions. So you could be teaching, if you're working at the shelter, you could be teaching people about what qualities they should be looking for in a pet that's going to suit their, find out what their lifestyle is like, and here's what kind of pet you should be looking for. You're going to want a cat that's pretty laid back, because you're not going to enjoy that one that zooms around the house, you know. Or you might be teaching a class at the zoo. You'll be maybe learning how to handle some animals if you were going to be a volunteer at the zoo or get a part-time job to do some education presentations, teaching about the biology. So that can get you kind of in the education aspect of it. You also can professionally get a degree in environmental education or interpretive sciences, and folks that do that as a career typically will go through like a school of natural resources and get some environmental or natural resources degree as a stepping stone. Occasionally people get 2 degrees. They'll get an animal science, they may get a teaching certificate. Some people actually go teach in a classroom for a few years, and then they decide, you know, I really need to be teaching about nature and wildlife, so they'll get out of the traditional classroom and do non-traditional programming like I do. The problem with that jump is if you want to teach again, because you lose your teaching certificate in the non-traditional classrooms, so you'd have to go back and retest.
Yeah, because my mom actually, when she took a while off because she had me and my brother, and then she got back in. Of course, she had to go take a bunch of classes and get her license and all that. So, yeah. So really, like the some advice you'd have for me is like mostly trying to get out there and get resume.
Yeah, the hands-on practice that you can get in the real world is going to serve you as well or better. I don't want to really say better than your education, because a formal education is important. But quite honestly, I got all of the jobs I got more based on the stuff I did outside of the classroom. And I mean, by the time I was 22, I mean, I had done so many things with so many animals and different entities. I had been working with a veterinarian full-time since I was 17. Well, full-time during the summers when I wasn't in school. And with the wildlife center, if you get in the wildlife hospital setting, I mean, we were doing surgeries, treatments. You know, I felt like I'd been to vet school already. If you find a really good small animal or large animal vet that you can work with as a shadow or a mentor student, you know, you might be able to learn a lot of those things outside the classroom that will help prepare you. Now that webinars are like a dime a dozen, just going online and finding some free webinars on pre-vet or veterinary topics, I can't ever get enough of that stuff. So whenever somebody presents a webinar on some wildlife or conservation thing, you know, I might watch that. I wish we had that when I was younger, because on the days that you couldn't go out in the field and do work, you could at least do a webinar that evening or something.
Because I'm actually thinking about volunteering at the zoo over the summer, so
Yeah.
anything to get that up and
Yep.
So now, do you think veterinary education and an experience would be beneficial for a wildlife rehabilitator?
Yeah, so in the field of wildlife rehabilitation, it has its own world, in the sense that even veterinarians who do wildlife rehabilitation have to go through a lot of rehabilitation training, like to train for it, because what they know about dogs or cats or horses or cows is only so applicable to wildlife. And a lot of wildlife medicine is the handling of it. Wild animals their bodies are designed to heal on their own, so to speak. Like with a lot of domestic animals, the way we've bred them, you know, they need a lot of health care or they're not going to survive some of their injuries. A wild animal is going to survive the injuries whether you treat it or not, so to speak, like if it's a broken bone. What we're trying to do is set the bone properly so that the animal doesn't end up with one leg shorter than the other. But there's a fine line between, you know, the treatment and care that you would do for a dog or cat, where you're, you know, maybe doing physical therapy 4 times a day. That could kill a wild animal because of the handling stress. So we do a lot of different techniques with it. So the wildlife community has its own conferences and training and classes and workshops, and you could do those now. So in November in Columbus, we have the Ohio Wildlife Rehabilitators Association Conference. So OWRA, you could go to the website, owra.org. And I think student attendance is minimal, like, you know, I don't know, $25 or something to attend. And if you sign up, it's a very small conference, only a couple hundred people, so it's not a big, scary, overwhelming conference. But it's a good way to network and find out, you know, meet some of the people and talk about some cases or whatever. But you can pick what sessions you want to go to. There's a lot of other students that go to that conference, and you could even take some of the classes. I took my IWRC is the International Council that teaches the 1A, 1B skills class. So it's kind of like your basic certificate to do wildlife rehab. You know, I think I was only like 17 when I took that. So you can, you know, be younger and still take those classes. So that's a way to get some experience too, is just going to some of the conferences or signing up for some of the workshops.
So with as an animal rehabilitator, is it a lot of like direct work, or is it more indirect, like I don't know how to,
Yeah,
you know,
so
like hands-on?
Yeah, it's mostly hands-on, and except for people who don't feel comfortable with the hands-on part, there's a lot of other jobs you can do hands-off. So, like, usually people are paired up, say, for even cage cleaning. So if there's someone who's not comfortable handling the animals, they might clean the enclosures while the animal's been handled and taken out for treatments or meds. But by and large, when you talk about wildlife rehabilitation, you're talking about hands-on. So rehabbers learn how to do physical exams, emergency stabilization. You work in coordination with a veterinarian, but the volunteers or rehab staff. If it's a larger center, they usually have some staff. They're doing almost all of the work. Probably their veterinarian's obviously going to do the surgery. Veterinarian's going to prescribe medications, but in effect, all the other people involved with that animal are essentially vet assistants.
Mhm.
So,
could you actually be a vet tech and also help with animal rehabilitation?
yep. So, like the Wildlife Center here in Columbus has 2 vet techs on staff. Now Columbus has a larger center, so they also have a part-time vet. I work with another rehab center that has just a couple staff and a referring vet. So, animals are taken to a couple vets that work on the wildlife when something needs treatment. Because a lot of times, wildlife doesn't necessarily need surgery. They just need some antibiotics and some wound cleaning and a lot of rest. So they're put in a nice quiet ward, and less is more as far as, I think that was my funny name.
Oh.
Less is more as far as their recovery process. So the referring vet will only see the cases that the vet techs or the vet assistants can't handle on their own.
Alright. Do you have an actual favorite animal that you like working with the most?
I've spent most of my life working with birds of prey, training them and handling them and doing shows with them. Mm-hmm. So I really like those. I also raised the 2 coyote that are at the Wildlife Center now on display there, Hope and Dryden. So I guess I like those guys a lot. So I think I got a picture of Hopi back here in the snow. Yeah.
Oh,
This is her. She's playing.
oh,
Playing in the snow.
oh, she is gorgeous.
And I actually really like reptiles a lot too, so I like snakes and snakes and turtles and
Yeah, because I
lizards.
I really like birds of prey because I think that'd be good for I have so many allergies, but I'm
Yeah,
still set
that's
on
right.
zoology.
Yeah, so birds would be
Yeah.
more up your alley than
Yeah.
the mammals.
Yeah. So, because I actually figured out that I'm allergic to most animals with fur.
What you might want to
So-
do is try to get an internship someday, if it's a high school one or a college one.
Mhm.
It depends on where you go to school, but Medina Raptor Center is good. That's Laura Collins. And then Raptor Inc. is down in Cincinnati. And then I'm trying to think of what Gail Locke's. It's like maybe it's just the Raptor Center or something, but those are just all Ohio bird of prey rehabilitation facilities. And if you work in a rehabilitation facility with raptors, you're going to learn about all kinds of raptors.
Mhm.
If you go to a zoo, you'll probably be in a bird department and you might work with some raptors, but a lot of them might just be exhibit birds and not
Mhm.
necessarily healing birds. Now, if you get into an education program and they have hawks and owls that they take out for programs, then you could learn a lot about them through an education program.
Are there any cases that you get a lot, like broken legs? I know those might not be as common, but stuff like that.
Yeah, so one of the most common reasons for admission is cat attacks. So squirrels, small possums, small rabbits, birds. That's one of the number 1 cause of admission. So those are bite wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally dog attacks, but more often it's cats. And then hit by cars. So those might present as broken limbs. A lot of times they just present as trauma, a lot of head trauma, because with a wild animal, sometimes they actually hit the vehicle. So if they're running across a road and they hit a tire, or they're flying and they hit the side of a car, so those always have eye injuries. So we see a lot of eye injuries or head trauma injuries. And then also a lot of fractured jaws for the same reason, where they've crashed into something on the road, usually. Entanglements, fishing line, fish hooks, plastic, even like a little yogurt cup. We'll get animals that's got their head stuck in a yogurt cup or a peanut butter jar. So we do a lot of education trying to get people to not leave hooks in line, ponds and creeks, and throw your plastics away. Well, recycle them or reuse them if you can, but throw them away in sealed containers and bags where they're not just floating all around in the environment. I mean, it's obviously bad for the environment too, but and we also remind people anything that our animals don't get caught in or eat it here eventually ends up in the ocean, and then a sea turtle or a dolphin's going to eat it, and then they're going to get sick. So if you don't care about our wildlife here, if you care anything about sea turtles or whales and dolphins, then think about them. You know, you try to find what people will. You have to reach people emotionally to get them to take action about anything. You have to find that emotional connection. So you have to make wildlife issues real for them, and you have to put it in their backyard, so to speak. So, like most people can relate to their own dogs and cats and pets, and so you can explain to them sometimes things that as it relates to a pet animal, and they're like, oh yeah, I've seen my dog do that. That makes sense.
And it also, is it difficult to obtain training and licensing for like different things, like animal? I know there's a rehabilitators like licensing and stuff like that. Yeah.
So each state is different, and in Ohio, there's requirements for you to actually mentor with somebody, but it's not hard to get your Category 1 permit. So a Category 1 permit allows you to rehabilitate some orphan animals, like squirrels. I think you can do squirrels, some rodents, probably other rodents like mice, rabbits, cottontail rabbits. Seems like there's a couple other. And then they're trying to add some songbirds to that for people that eventually want to do birds, because right now Category 1 only covers some mammal species. So you have to take the Category 1 class and get your Category 1 certificate. Then you can apply, but on the application